There was only one room left, and he was forced to share it with her. A Vorrkai war general, a human diplomat. One pressurized cabin on a dying colony ship. He had survived 100 battles. He was not prepared for her. Chapter 1. The Last Cabin. General Vorrkai of the Vorrkai Dominion had conquered 17 star systems, negotiated the surrender of 3 planetary governments, and once stood alone on the bridge of a burning warship for 6 hours until his crew was safely evacuated. He had never, in 40 years of distinguished military service, been forced to share sleeping quarters with anyone, let alone a human. He stared at the colony ship's accommodation registry with the particular stillness of a very large predator who has decided that whatever comes next will be handled with extreme dignity. There must be an error, he said. The ship's purser, a small gray-skinned Telesi who had clearly delivered bad news to dangerous people before, did not flinch. The Arcturus Dawn is carrying 600 colonists, General. The diplomatic conference overbooked our premium cabins by 1. Every other space on the ship is shared dormitory berthing. She paused. 40 people per room. Vorrkai considered this. He was 7'3". His secondary shoulder plating, a natural Vorrkai anatomical feature that other species sometimes confuse for armor, extended another 4 inches on each side. A 40-person dormitory was not a serious suggestion. The shared cabin, he said. Who is the other occupant? The purser's expression flickered with something he could not quite read. The human delegate, Dr. Sarah Okafor. She arrived 20 minutes ago. She is already. Another pause. Rearrange the furniture. Vorrkai closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he picked up his travel case. Regulation military, black, the size of a small vehicle, and walked to cabin 7. Chapter 2. What he found. He heard her before he reached the door. Not arguing, not crying, not any of the things his extensive intelligence briefing on human behavior had led him to expect from a person in a stressful situation. She was singing, quietly, to herself, in a low, warm voice, something in a language his translator did not recognize, which meant it was old. Human music more than 200 years old still regularly defeated the universal translation matrix, because the linguistic root structures had drifted too far from modern speech. He stood outside cabin 7 for 4 seconds before he knocked. The singing stopped. It's open. He opened the door. The cabin was, objectively, the same size it had been when the ship launched. Approximately 6 meters by 4, 2 sleeping platforms, a shared sanitation unit, a narrow viewport. What Dr. Sarah Okafor had done to it in 20 minutes was difficult to fully process. One sleeping platform had been pushed against the far wall to create a clear central working space. Her travel cases, there were 4 of them, all open, had been organized in what appeared to be a functional field office, complete with a holographic display already projecting star charts and what Vorrkai recognized as preliminary treaty language. A single flowering plant in a sealed travel terrarium sat on the viewport ledge. Dr. Okafor herself stood in the middle of this organized chaos, tablet in hand, reading. She was small by human standards. Compact was the word his briefing had used, with close-cropped dark hair, deep brown skin, and the particular quality of stillness that Vorrkai associated with people who were always thinking faster than they were speaking. She looked up at him. She did not flinch. He noticed this immediately because most species flinched. He was very large. His eyes were gold and vertical pupiled. His secondary shoulder plating added significant apparent mass. Species that had not previously encountered Vorrkai in person almost universally stepped back. Dr. Okafor looked at him the way she had probably looked at every new problem in her life, with calm, immediate, total attention. General Vorrkai, she said, I read your file. 3-star systems in 6 years. That's exceptional. I'm Sarah. She extended her right hand. He had been briefed on a human greeting gesture. Open palm. No weapons. An act of deliberate vulnerability. He shook her hand. Her grip was firm and warm and brief and professional. His secondary nervous system registered her pulse, fast, controlled, and something else he filed away without examining. "You have rearranged the furniture," he said. "I work better with open floor space," she said, entirely unapologetically. "I left you the platform by the door. It's longer, which I figured you'd need. If the arrangement doesn't work, we can discuss it." She had already looked back at her tablet. "Fair warning, I work late, and I'm up early. I'll use earphones. I also talk to myself sometimes when I'm drafting language. I'll try to keep it down." Vorrkai set his travel case down slowly. In 40 years of military service, he had been briefed, debriefed, commanded, and occasionally challenged. He had never been efficiently processed and filed by someone who then went back to reading before he had fully entered the room. He found, to his considerable confusion, that he did not find this irritating. The Vorrkai have no word for charming. They have a word, velthansi, which translates as the unsettling sensation of finding someone exactly where you did not expect anyone to be. Vorrkai had felt it precisely twice in his life. Once on a battlefield, once in a cabin on the Arcturus Dawn. Chapter 3, The First Night. The cabin was 6 meters by 4. He was 7'3". She was at most 5'4". The physics of the situation were unavoidable. By the third hour of the journey, Vorrkai had concluded that Dr. Okafor operated on a frequency he had no prior experience with. She worked in a state of absolute focused silence. He could almost feel the concentration coming off her like heat, and then, without warning or transition, would say something so unexpected that he would lose his place in his own thoughts entirely. "Do Vorrkai dream?" she asked, not looking up from her display. At approximately the second hour, he considered whether to answer. "Yes." "What about?" "Frequency patterns," he said, which was true and also something he had never told anyone. Vorrkai perceive emotional states as tonal. What you might call feelings register to us as sound. When we dream, we hear the frequencies of everyone we have known. She looked up then. "That's beautiful," she said simply. Not performatively, not diplomatically. Simply, and probably overwhelming. "It can be," he said. She nodded as though he had confirmed something she already suspected, and went back to her work. He went back to his, but the air in the cabin felt different afterward. Not smaller, as he had expected forced proximity to feel, but more specific, more real. She fell asleep at her desk at the third hour past midnight. He knew the precise moment it happened because the rhythm of her breathing changed, slower, deeper, and the quiet tapping of her stylus on the desk surface stopped. He looked over from his platform. She had fallen forward over her arms, her cheek against the treaty document she had been drafting, one hand still loosely holding the stylus. The holographic display still projected softly above her, painting her face in cool blue light. The flowering plant on the viewport ledge had opened further in the recycled ship air. Vorrkai stood. He crossed the 6 meters of cabin floor, 3 steps for him, and picked up the thin blanket from his own sleeping platform. He placed it over her shoulders with a precision he usually reserved for handling fragile diplomatic artifacts. She did not wake. He returned to his platform, lay down, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. He was listening, he realized, to the frequency she made. It was warm, steady, shot through with something quick and bright, even in sleep. He had no word for it in his language. He had no word for it in any language he spoke, and he spoke 11. He filed this information away under a category he labeled, for lack of anything better, investigate later. Chapter 4, What She Noticed. Sarah Okafor had spent 12 years as a diplomatic negotiator for the Confederation. She had sat across tables from species who breathed methane, species who communicated entirely through color change, and one species who negotiated exclusively through intermediary puppets for reasons that were apparently religious and had never been fully explained. She was not easily surprised by people. General Vorrkai surprised her. Not because he was large. She had worked with HFY before, who were larger. Not because he was initially reserved. That was standard for Vorrkai military class. She had read the cultural briefings. What surprised her was the gap between his file and his actual presence. His file said, Decorated General, Strategic Genius, Reputation for Cold Precision, Minimal Diplomatic Warmth. Not recommended for close quarters negotiations due to intimidating physical presence and communication style. What she found in cabin 7 was a person who had, without being asked, covered her with his own blanket when she fell asleep at her desk. She had not been fully asleep, a negotiator's habit, always half listening, and she had felt the careful, almost painfully gentle way he had placed it over her, as though she were made of something breakable. She had kept her eyes closed and her breathing even, and cataloged the sensation of being looked after by a 7-foot alien general who had definitely not planned on being kind to her and had done it anyway. By the second day, she had identified 6 other things his file had failed to mention. He read constantly, not mission briefs, literature. She caught a glimpse of the title once, a Vorrkai philosophical text on the concept of Velthan, which her translator rendered imprecisely as resonance between unlikely things. He always made 2 cups of heated ship brew in the morning, and on the second day, he placed one at her workspace without speaking, exactly how she took it, which meant he had paid attention on the first day. He moved through the small cabin with a consciousness of his own size that was almost tender, angles adjusted, reach minimized, his whole enormous body in constant quiet negotiation with the space, so he never crowded her. And he listened, not the diplomatic performance of listening, actually listened with that complete gold-eyed attention that made her feel like every word she said was being kept somewhere. "You're not what your file says," she told him on the evening of the second day. He was quiet for a moment. "Neither are you. What does my file say? Relentless, single-minded, poor interpersonal boundaries." His gold eyes held something that in a human face she would have called amusement. "It does not mention the singing." She felt warmth climb her face. "You heard that before you opened the door." I waited. A pause. I did not want to stop it. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. In 12 years of negotiations, she had learned to read the space between what people said and what they meant. The space here was very small and very loud. "It was my grandmother's song," she said. "She was from Lagos. I sing it when I'm nervous." "You were nervous." "I was about to share a cabin with a Vorrkai general." She held his gaze. "Were you nervous?" The silence stretched 2 full seconds, which for a Vorrkai, she had learned, was equivalent to a very long time. "I was," he said finally, unprepared. Chapter 5, The Storm. On the third day, the Arcturus Dawn flew into the edge of a gravitational shear event, the kind of electromagnetic interference that played havoc with ship systems and sent unsecured items sliding across every surface. Not dangerous, but violent enough that the ship's AI ordered all passengers to secure themselves in their cabins. The cabin lights dropped to emergency amber. The viewport showed nothing but static charge and the deep dark of disrupted space. The ship groaned in a way that Sarah knew was structural flex, completely normal, completely harmless, but that her body responded to with a spike of pure adrenaline regardless. She was at her desk when the worst lurch hit. She grabbed the desk edge, her travel terrarium, the plant, the one living thing she brought on every long-haul diplomatic mission, slid toward the edge of the viewport ledge. Velkos caught it without getting up. His arms simply extended across the full width of the cabin, a distance that would have required her sprint, and his hand closed around the terrarium with absolute gentle precision a half second before it would have fallen. He set it carefully back on the ledge, looked at her, said nothing. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. He saw her hands. She watched him see them and decide something. "Come here," he said. Not a command. She had heard his command voice in recordings. This was entirely different, quieter, something she did not have a word for. She crossed the cabin. He moved on the platform to create space, which for someone his size meant a careful and deliberate rearrangement of his entire frame. She sat beside him. The next lurch hit and she braced against his arm, that massive, solid, warm arm, and felt the ship flex around them and felt him remain completely still, immovable, as though he had decided the ship could do what it liked. "Vorrkai physiology," he said, in the tone of someone offering useful information, "includes a secondary skeletal structure that locks under pressure. I cannot be moved by this. Is it your way of telling me to lean on you? It is my way of telling you, he said carefully, that it is structurally available as an option. She laughed. She felt him register the laugh, a slight shift in his stillness, something that moved through him like a frequency finding its match. She leaned against his arm. The amber emergency lights painted everything in gold. The ship groaned and flexed. He did not move. They stayed like that for 2 hours while the sheer event passed. She fell asleep again, against his arm this time, not her desk. She was aware, at the edge of sleep, of his other hand moving, very slowly, very carefully, to rest beside hers on the platform. Not touching, just beside, the precise distance of someone who wanted to and had decided to wait. She moved her hand the remaining 2 inches. His fingers closed around hers with the care of someone handling something they had decided mattered more than anything they had handled before. She slept. He stayed awake and listened to her frequency and did not file it away under investigate later anymore. He knew now exactly what it was. He simply did not yet know what to do with knowing. Chapter 6. What he said. The Arcturus Dawn reached the conference station on the morning of the 4th day. The gravitational shear was gone. The lights were back to full. The corridor outside Cabin 7 was full of delegates and staff, and the bureaucratic noise of a major diplomatic summit getting organized. Neither of them moved to open the door. Sarah stood at the viewport looking at the station, enormous, gleaming, absolutely full of the rest of the universe coming to reclaim them both. Vale Koss stood behind her, which for him, given the cabin dimensions, meant he was close enough that she could feel the warmth his body produced. Vorrkai ran several degrees warmer than humans, which she had discovered on the first night, and which the last 4 days had made her think of as simply the temperature of the cabin. When we walk out of this door, she said, you are the Vorrkai military representative, and I am the Confederation diplomatic lead. We are on opposite sides of the table. I know, he said. The treaty we're negotiating limits Vorrkai expansion in sectors 4 through 7. Your government sent you here to fight that. I know what my government sent me to do. She turned. He was right there, all 7 feet 3 of him, gold eyes steady, secondary shoulder plating and military bearing, and 40 years of war she hadn't been part of, and also somehow the person who had covered her with his blanket and caught her plant and held her hand in the dark and made her ship brew exactly how she took it. I need you to know, she said, that in that room, these 4 days, that was real. Whatever happens at the table, that was real for me. Something moved through his face. All of it, all at once. The way things moved through faces when people had been holding them still for a long time and finally stopped. Vorrkai do not make statements of personal significance lightly, he said. We believe words of that kind, once spoken, change the speaker permanently. He paused. I have not spoken them since my bonded partner died 11 years ago. Sarah held completely still. What I feel when you are in this room, he said, does not have a word in my language. The closest is Velthanasai. It means the recognition of a frequency you did not know you were missing until you heard it. His gold eyes were completely steady. I have been hearing yours for 4 days. I do not know how to unhear it. Then don't, she said. He reached out, slowly, with the same care he used for everything breakable and important, and his hand came to rest against her jaw. His thumb moved across her cheekbone. She felt the warmth of him like a frequency of its own, something that moved through every nerve she had and settled. The table will be difficult, he said. I know. She turned her face into his hand slightly. I'm going to fight hard for what my people need. I would expect nothing less. Something in his eyes that was, she had learned, his version of a smile. I will fight hard for mine. And after the table, his hand was warm against her face. Outside the viewport, the station turned slowly in the light of a distant sun. The door to the rest of the universe was right there, 10 steps away, already waiting. After the table, he said, there will still only be one room, and I would like very much to share it with you. Not because I am forced to. He paused, finding the words in a language that was not built for what he was saying. Because every room I've been in before this one was missing something, and now I know what that was. Sarah Okafor who had negotiated with methane breathers and color changers and puppet diplomats, who had held her composure in rooms where the fate of millions turned on single words, who prided herself on never being caught without the right language, had no answer for a long moment. Then she stood on her toes, which was not sufficient for the height difference, and she knew it. And he understood immediately and bent down, and she pressed her forehead against his. Warm skin against warm skin, his frequency and hers, finally in the same room without a table between them. Velthan Si, she said, her translator giving her the pronunciation. Yeah, that. He made a sound she had not heard from him before. Low, resonant, something that her body understood before her mind caught up. She would learn later that it was the Vorrkai equivalent of a laugh that had turned into something more. The sound of a person who has been a certain kind of alone for a very long time and has just unexpectedly and completely stopped being. Epilogue. The table. The Sector 4 treaty negotiations lasted 9 days. Every analyst who attended agreed they were among the most productive diplomatic sessions in Confederation Vorrkai history. Not because the two lead representatives agreed on everything, but because they fought with a particular honesty that moved things forward instead of sideways. General Vorrkai argued for his people's expansion rights with a precision that made 3 Confederation junior delegates reconsider their careers. Dr. Sarah Okafor dismantled 3 of his strongest points with evidence she had apparently been sitting on since day 1 and deployed at exactly the right moment. They signed a treaty on the 9th day. Sectors 4 through 7, protected. Vorrkai expansion, rerouted to unclaimed space in the Outer Drift, where 3 planetary survey teams later discovered something none of the negotiators had expected: habitable worlds. Enough of them that the border dispute became, quietly and without announcement, irrelevant. No one at the table knew the 2 lead negotiators had spent the 4 preceding days sharing a 6x4 cabin on the Arcturus Dawn. No one knew about the blanket, or the ship brew, or the plant, or the 2 hours in amber emergency lighting when a very large general had held a very determined diplomat's hand in the dark. No one knew, except the 2 of them, that the treaty had been partly shaped by 4 days of conversations in a small room where there was no table between them and no performance required, and 2 people from different stars had talked to each other as simply and honestly as people could. Afterward, in the corridor outside the signing room, amid the noise of a summit concluding and delegates dispersing, Vorrkai fell in a step beside Sarah. They walked in the particular way that people walk when they're trying not to show that the space between them is a conversation. Dinner, she said. The ship back to Confederation Central departs in 3 hours, he said. I have checked. There are 2 cabins remaining. He paused. I have booked one. She stopped walking, looked up at him. His gold eyes were steady and warm and completely without armor. 1, she said. 1, he confirmed. Unless you would prefer. 1. She said, and started walking again. He fell back in a step beside her. The corridor was full of the noise of history being made and filed and moved on from, the way history always was. 2 people walked through it. 1 very tall, 1 not, close enough that her hand occasionally brushed his, and neither of them moved away. Out in the unclaimed dark of the Outer Drift, where no one had thought to look until a border stopped matching, new worlds turned slowly in the light of unnamed suns. Some rooms you were forced into. Some choices were made for you by overbooked ships and impossible logistics, in a universe that had, apparently, opinions about where you needed to be. And sometimes, rarely, and only if you were paying attention, the room you were forced to share turned out to be the one you had been missing all along.